Of all the clone trooper variants out there, two capture the imaginations of Clone Wars fans more than any others: Clone Commandos and ARC Troopers. These two types of elite clones seem outwardly to be very similar, and at any rate, both of them are undeniably badass. But they are next to never seen together, and when they are, many more casual Clone Wars fans would be surprised to learn that they didn't get along well at all. In this video, we'll be discussing how ARC Troopers and Clone Commandos were independent in very different ways. To start, we're going to clear up a fairly common misconception. ARC Troopers and Clone Commandos were actually very different. They were rarely seen together because they would rarely have both fit a mission profile. As we discussed in another recent video, Clone Commandos were infiltrators, whose job it was to work behind enemy lines on special missions, operating covertly and in small groups. ARC Troopers, however, were created to be war machines. They were used as tactical commanders, command liaisons for Jedi generals, elite soldiers, and in the case of squads like the Munilance 10, they were often sent behind enemy lines not for covert missions, but to cut bloody swaths through enemy command centers. As we discussed in our recent video on Clone Commandos, the 10,000 elite troopers of the Special Operations Brigade were between regular clones and ARC Troopers. They were bred to be more independent and more like Jango Fett, like the ARCs, but they were also bred to be squad-centric and obedient, like regular clone troopers. This mix, it was hoped, would create a flexible soldier that could operate behind enemy lines apart from command units, but not one that would be independent enough to the point of disobedience, as the ARC Troopers proved themselves to be time and time again. ARC Troopers, meanwhile, were pretty much pure Jango, to once again borrow the words of Karen Travis. 100 Alpha Series ARC Troopers were bred by the Kaminoans, and with the exception of growth acceleration and slight behavioral modifications, they were pretty much identical to Jango. The Kaminoans considered them a secret project, and few clones were aware of their existence. Even some of the Commando trainers were kept in the dark about them. They were made to be independent almost in the extreme, an experiment that attempted to harness what made Jango Fett the perfect warrior. ARCs not only looked like Jango, but thought like him too. This was exacerbated by how the ARC Troopers were trained. Jango Fett actually trained every single one of them personally, with minimal aid from other instructors or the Kaminoans. Fett taught them how to fight, how to handle weapons and technology, and how to react in a combat situation, as had been done for the other clones. However, unlike regular clones, they were also taught to think independently. Fett taught them to use their natural fierceness, their independence, and their high levels of creativity to their advantage, making them not just the perfect soldiers, but the perfect commanders as well. ARC Troopers were one-man armies. The Clone Commandos, on the other hand, were trained by a team of 100 skilled warriors handpicked by Fett, most of them Mandalorian. These commandos essentially received regular clone training, but on steroids. They participated in live-fire combat drills, went through endless strings of battle simulations, and even practiced missions by fighting through the regular training complex to steal equipment. They were trained to be stronger than the regular clones and masters of behind-the-scenes work. However, while they were trained to be more independent than the regular clones, so as to require less command guidance during missions, they weren't nearly as independent as ARC Troopers. They were indoctrinated with a fierce loyalty to the Republic, just like their standard issue brothers, and they were made to be obedient despite their independence. Predictably, the Kaminoans viewed ARCs and Commandos differently. They actually held Clone Commandos in a bit of a higher regard, as seen in the opening cutscene of Star Wars Republic Commando. They believed that they had come out more or less perfectly, despite some annoying little personality quirks. They were independent yet obedient, the skilled commandos that they had intended to breed. They were pleased with their results and sent them all off with Master Yoda as part of the first shipment of the Grand Army, though we all know how that ended. On the other side, the Kaminoans actually kind of feared the ARC Troopers. They were a success as well. I mean, the ARCs were the ultimate soldiers, fiercely independent and deadly in combat if still loyal to the Republic, but the Kaminoans didn't trust them. They believed that their extreme individuality made them a threat, and so they kept them a secret. 99 Alpha-class ARCs, the entire series save for Spar, who as we all know had deserted by that point, were kept in a stasis deep into Poker City, intended to be deployed only as a last line of defense for Kamino. The Kaminoans deployed them in the first battle of Kamino reluctantly despite the need, although their distrust for ARC Troopers began to decrease quickly as they proved their effectiveness on battlefronts across the galaxy. Now that we've contrasted the origins of the two clone variants, let's contrast their general outlooks on the Clone Wars, which is where the heart of this matter lies. Overall, while clone commandos were more independent than their common brethren, their outlooks on the Clone Wars and their general purposes were quite similar. Commandos were a bit more cynical, sure, but for the most part they were loyal to the Republic and were more than willing to sacrifice their lives for it. They were more of a Captain Rex kind of independent. They thought for themselves, but they still followed orders and the general mentality that the Kaminoans wanted their clones to follow. This, of course, was why the Kaminoans held them in high regard. Clone Commandos weren't overly fond of Jedi, but they still respected them, and some teams grew close with their Force-sensitive commanders. Jedi Padawan Etain Tar Merkin became close with the commandos of Omega Squad fairly early in the war, while the commandos of Iron Team refused to execute Order 66 and help Rowan Shrine and other Jedi escape Imperial-occupied Mokana. Most held a little bit of disdain for the high and mighty pacifist ways of the Jedi, of course, but that didn't stop them from having a high respect for their combat abilities and for their general wisdom. Unlike many of their clone brethren, commandos weren't overly fond of the Empire. A number of commandos deserted, like the Iron Team did, and many others took the easier way out and simply retired when offered the chance. Those who didn't retire were lumped in with the Imperial 501st Legion, where their partaking in some of the Empire's early atrocities led many commandos to question their loyalties. Even those commanders that were loyal to the Empire had a vague dissatisfaction with their duties, and were often disturbed by some of the Empire's more controversial actions. Most importantly, however, clone commandos were very close with each other, albeit in smaller groups than standard clones were. Each commander was fiercely loyal to the three men with whom he was raised, who considered each other brothers and cared for each other even more than standard units cared for their batches. Despite being less group-orientated overall when it came to the larger Special Operations Brigade, commandos were more group-orientated than the standard clones within their squads, which is in part what made Delta's squad the force that it was. ARC troopers, however, had different outlooks on things. They were fiercely independent to the point of almost being loners, much like the late Jango Fett. They were loyal to the Republic, but only insofar as they believed that it would be the best side in the war, not out of any sense of indoctrinated duty. The most notable difference from the clone commandos is that they did not, as General Krell put it, succumb to authority. If they disagreed with what a superior officer said, they would argue with them on it stubbornly, something no other clone variant in the GAR would ever do. The chain of command didn't matter much at all to them. If they respected a superior, they would follow them loyally. But if they didn't care what rank they were, they would do what they thought was best. This led many ARC troopers to actually dislike the Jedi, or at least dislike how they handled the war. Even ARCs like Alpha 17, who was good friends with Obi-Wan Kenobi, disagreed with the Jedi's approach to the war, which they saw as unnecessarily righteous and not brutal enough to succeed. Many ARCs outright saw the Jedi as tactically inept, which is, of course, a fair assessment of many Jedi generals. They had no real love for the Jedi, especially those Jedi that didn't respect their expertise. While ARC troopers were vastly more independent than clone commandos, they were actually more supportive of the Empire in general. While most ARCs chose retirement when the Clone Wars ended, this was out of a desire for a bit more freedom than it was out of objection to the Empire's policy. Indeed, ARC troopers actually had fewer doubts about the Empire than commandos did, in large part because many of them were thinking like Imperials from early in their careers. Jedi and ARCs clashed the most over the brutality of tactics. In many cases, ARC troopers were known to embrace extreme strategies that would cost more civilian lives, but would make victory easier, something most Jedi were vehemently against. Because the ARCs were more independent, they took on more of a Fett-like attitude, and so, ironically, they agreed with the Empire more than they disagreed with it. After all, the tactics that made some clone commandos doubt the Empire were tactics that the ARCs had been pushing for since Kamino. Furthermore, Alpha-class ARC troopers had little to no concept of brotherhood. While those clones that were promoted to ARC trooper were different in this regard, as they were in many others, the original ARCs were, like Jango, loners, who didn't care much for just about anyone else. They stood in stark contrast to clone commandos, and while they still respected them as skilled soldiers, they had no great love for them, and the feeling was mutual. While it would be misleading to say that they disliked each other, they didn't exactly like each other either, and they disagreed on a great many things. So, those are the differences between clone commandos and ARC troopers, but what do you think? Did any of this surprise you? And more importantly, which do you think are better, clone commandos or ARC troopers? Which one would you want to be if you were part of the Grand Army of the Republic? Post your thoughts in the comments section below. And just before you go guys, I would really appreciate it if you checked out my Patreon, as every dollar helps improving the quality and quantity of videos on this channel. And I want to give a big thank you to all my patrons at the moment. Their names are in the description below. So massive thank you to you guys. You don't know how much you're helping out the channel. But you know what else is in the description? Our Geetsly's gaming network. So if you want to join the wider Geetsly's community in a gaming environment, play as a clone trooper, stormtrooper, or even play on our Halo roleplay, then make sure you check out all the links in the description below. All those game modes are fun, our Roblox is growing, our Gary's mod is always growing, and we've got plenty of players into Star Wars just as much as you are. Anyways guys, as always, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.